Hello and welcome to another video. So today we're taking a look at basically a pure neutral sword, you know, with your standard Alberts and Alduras of course for the extra push, Cinderella for the 3-drop 4/4, and that is about it in the way of sword cards outside of Council of the Cardknights, which is basically a neutral by default, outside of being a spell due to the 3 summons all being neutrals. Other than that, the main core cards for this deck are Angelic Slacker, the +1/+0 given to everything that attacks while this has ambush is absolutely amazing pretty much, and Shield of Flame, which combos really nicely with it as 6 damage or just a standard 3 damage 2-drop spell, which is pretty crucial in this kind of meta to have a 2-drop 3 damage. Other than that, you've got the big hitters. You've got Cinderella as a 4/4, you've got your Albert and Aldo as command, which both give you standard board presence, Rabdias for your draw, Grimnir for your late game, and then a bunch of your standard neutral early game and the Kiss of the Princess, which is a great booster. Other than that, the really crucial card would be Council of the Cardknights with those triple summons, and in an easy Bane, it works out really nicely for removing big wards, along with getting in a little bit of chip damage, especially if comboed with things like Angelic Slacker or Alice from Alice Wonderland Explorer. So, we'll get right into the games here, and hope you enjoy the video. Okay, game 1 here is against Haven. We start off with some okay cards, and then we quickly go and drop the higher 2, looking for something lower. Getting the Goblin and the Lyriel, pretty nice. 1 and 2 drops. All we needed now would be a 3-drop, and we draw into Grimnir. Grimnir has become such a central card for basically all neutral decks now. It's got such a strong early game and late game presence, along with Alice Wonderland boost is quite amazing. So we do curve out pretty nicely with Haven playing nothing turn 1 and then very little turn 2. Pretty much letting us chip in 4 total damage for over a couple of turns. So we have double Saber, making things a little tricky with this hand. And our opponent ends up pulling off the Leader. Probably the worst spot to play Leader though. They're too easy to be traded with here, and I'm just able to fill board. So I do decide just to push Alt Face, drop him down to 15, let him get that little heal in, and force him to have to trade out. Fortunately with double Lyriel, there's not too much to really worry about. And we draw our own Goblin Leader, which will refill our board. So we got it pretty easy. Archer fires 1, Goblin trades nicely with the 4/1 to the... I should have traded the 2/2 into the 1/2, but I ended up going with the 4/2 trade instead. Or 4/4, so it becomes a 4/3. Probably not the most optimal trade there. And unfortunately we do see Eagle drop and Princess going on the offensive. The one good thing is it takes their whole Princess play just to kill off a 4/4. So it's a good way for them to waste that. While we draw into Council of Cardknights, which I line up pretty nicely by removing the spare Goblin, not Golem. Boosting up the Bane so that I can attack with it. And it survives, which is a nice little bonus, allowing us to use it again. And just pushing 4 more damage. Fortunately the Goblin doesn't get his summon, but having him on board is nice. He's a sticky little guy. Fortunately they're using Grimnir as a defensive tool here. Works out quite nicely. The biggest risk to my board now would have been Decree. Fortunately with double Albert, then playing Decree would hit pretty hard when I could just ram face. And we now get a 4 draw off the Rabdias. Such a crazy amount of draw power when you draw that. I did get another one, I was very tempted to play it, but I didn't want to overstack my hand. So I ended up just leaving it. And then just pinging some more damage. So again, we are open to a decree here, but they also are as well. Fortunately, they do go for the White Swan play. Something I haven't actually played against yet. This is the first White Swan I've come up against while playing. Luckily, they don't really have much that works well with Swan outside of healing themselves here. So it wasn't really too big of a threat. Unfortunately, my command works pretty nicely to just block off damage. And since I'm not worried about them healing for 2, pretty much just leave this up. So we do end up going with the Albert, which is enough to close out this game really quite easily for a perfect lethal. And that closes out game 1. So game 2 is against Rune. Getting a nice little variation of meta. First we see Haven, next we see Rune. With an okay starting hand of Goblin, Cinderella and Alice, if we can draw into a 2-drop, we will curve out pretty much perfectly. And as long as Rune doesn't play some crazy shenanigans, we should be pretty good. Double Alice. Can't ask for much more when you got a nice hand. Fortunately, they do just go into the single golem. Easy to trade into, not too threatening. Fortunately, then they play Witch's Cauldron along with another Scrap Iron. Really not putting any threats out at this point, which is really good. I got kind of lucky with this matchup. If they had have had a nice curve, it would have made this a lot more difficult. And with an Alice, we're able to easily trade with the 0-2 and ram an extra 4-4-2 face. Plus the extra boost to all 3 of those cards, giving us a +3 total boost, is really quite effective. And a second Cinderella. Can't ask for much better draw, especially since double Cinderellas can combo quite nicely together if you just want to bounce them back and forward. Basically for a free heal for 3. So we do push the 7 damage and another 4, leaving them on 5 for a reasonably quick total game. Closing out game 2 in record speed. Alright. And now our final matchup against a Shadow deck. Shadow isn't performing that well at the moment, but there are still quite a few people playing it. I'd assume because they invested a fair bit into it before the expansion, so they're kind of just trying to make what they can out of the deck. But fortunately, Shadow I would say isn't in a good spot at all. Nep is probably your best variant. Normal Shadow is performing okay in certain situations, especially if you can out aggro, but that's very difficult now with such high powered neutrals. So our top 3 at the moment would probably be Sword, Rune and Blood, which you've probably noticed, which is mostly what my channel's been in the last few days, mainly because they're the main decks that I've got cards for at the moment. I am working towards getting the Haven cards to allow me to build Haven. So this hand is pretty good. We managed to go for the Goblins, which is always a safe bet, playing out Goblins. So I try and decide whether I want to go into Alice or into the ambush. I decided to get out the ambush just so that I can get the extra damage off this turn. I would have got the same from Alice, but having that out on turn 4, instead of trying to wait it out to turn 5 and not have a chance to get it out, was a risk I really wasn't willing to take. Plus, fortunately, by doing that, I allow Alice to easily kill off this 5-6 in the next turn and still survive. So we do get a double boost from this on the board, well, 3 triple boost, 1 on board, 2 in hand. And Alice herself getting a good trade. So my main aim was to limit damage. We've got Command and Albert in hand along with Rabbit for draw. So I wasn't too worried about trying to handle that. This turns out to be a weird shadow variant in the end. So they don't really do anything much, so I just go into a Goblin, since our board is pretty much clear, and the extra draw power while I'll have a chance to play it. Aldous and Levi work, sorry, not Levi, Albert work really nicely when going for a finisher, so they can be played kind of at any point. Unfortunately, Death's Breath is an absolute pain. The other lucky part of Death's Breath is that they didn't have enough shadows to trigger it. And we're just able to flood the board with damage, completely ignoring their Death's Breath. The unfortunate part, they play Underworld Watchman. Very difficult card to deal with when you're running this sort of deck. So I end up having to sacrifice my 2 cards on board for this turn and try and set up for next turn instead. Which is fine, we have Albert, we have an Evolve Point, and we're going to have a double ambush on board. So we're going to have plenty of damage. They go for the Alice, so they must be playing a neutral shadow variant, which is a lot weaker than most other neutral decks at the moment. They just haven't settled into a groove. So they do push all their board presence. Unfortunately, that's not going to be enough to get past this Albert, which will close out this match. So, after 3 pretty cool matches and nice little bit of variation there, I can safely say this deck runs pretty nicely. I would say overall it definitely needs a little bit more refinement. Maybe dropping the Kiss of the Princess, maybe trying to change out the Actress for something a little more effective in the 2-drop slot. Those sort of cards could probably be switched out, refine them down a little bit until you find what works completely. Everything else is pretty nice, maybe upping the Goblin count, maybe even dropping the Wise Merman down to 1 instead. I'm not sure where I'd make certain changes, but those seem like pretty safe bets if you do want to change things. The really crucial cards obviously being Alice, Cinderella, the Command, the Alberts, and the Council of Card Knights, which is a pretty big staple in Sword. Other than that, the nice tech cards with Rabbit, Shield of Flame, Angelic Slacker, those sort of cards work really nicely with this deck, giving it the damage potential that it needs to really finish things off. I don't think it's quite as good as Neutral Blood, personally, but it's definitely up there as a tier 1 deck pretty easily. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. As always, you'll find the deck list in the description below, along with any kind of sources, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya!